All right, Ben, first, congratulations on 10 years of being a franchisee. That's awesome. But before we get into that part, I want to go back to 10 years ago. You're in corporate America. What's the trigger that makes you decide to go into franchising?
So I always had the dream of, starting my own business and owning my own business. But in that transition, there were a couple key factors. One was, the timing when I was, thought I had learned enough from my prior work in the corporate world. In really all the businesses I worked in were service related in terms of running a business, successfully growing a business, but also finding the right opportunity. It's interesting when you ask a question about franchising. One of the last roles I had in a corporate environment was actually working for a franchisor, a franchise company in the commercial cleaning space, where I sold franchises, I supported franchises, I did essentially some of the roles of what the people in Omaha do to support the right at home system. And that really drew me to, when I was going to start my own business, saying, hey, why reinvent the wheel? Look at a successful platform, a successful model where they give you some tools, they give you some support, they give you a strong brand that can really increase, I think, your chances of success. But the other thing that was important to me too, and then once I decided franchising was the way to go, I started looking at different franchises in different spaces, the home care space being one of them. But one of the things that, attracted me to home care was the value you bring to your community. It's great to be able to do something for a living where you can hopefully earn a good living, but also do good in your community, help families, make a difference. The very last job I had in the corporate space was in staffing. I worked, for a global staffing company. So this business is very similar. So I had a kind of an easier transition in standpoint that I had done, worked in the staffing business, staffing things like mechanical employees, pick and pack, things like that, data entry. But in this business, you're a staffing business where you're trying to really secure good caregivers to take good care of your clients. So one of the things I valued really about this industry as a whole is you help families, you make a difference, and you also help. We help our employees gain gainful employment. With a flexible model where they can. Work around their childcare or their school, or maybe this is a part-time job for them or their student. So, specifically the right at home system was attractive to me just because of, the quality of the organization, the people, the integrity, a well-known brand that's, one of the, initial maybe 5 or 6 companies that really got into this space and is very, very reputable and successful. There's others that are as well, but I just felt good when I went through my discovery and met the management team and the people that would be supporting us, that I really was partnering with an organization whose values matched mine.
If you and I were having a beer and you said, Nick, what do you see on resumes of franchisees? We'll start with the company, then any other, and I would say enterprise. Is there something to the magic of having a career there that the training of customer service or systems, like what's the magic here? Why do I see so many folks that grew up through the enterprise system eventually go into business ownership?
I think, I spent my first 11 years of my career out of college with Enterprise. So I was with them for years. I think one of the things Enterprise does really well is, yes, they teach you what customer service is about, how to really build a really positive client experience, how to make clients feel whole, how to make clients raving fans. But they also teach you really how to run a business. you learn P&L management, receivables, marketing, for example, marketing to referral sources. It would be a body shop, let's say, or a dealership or mechanic. So really all the elements of running a service related business, I think they have a really, really great program. And, for people that, and it's also, I think another reason why maybe, I'm just spitballing here, why enterprise, prepares people well for franchise ownership or business ownership is you're going to bust your hump. You're going to work really, really hard. It's not quite a 24/7 business. It's not quite as hard as running home care, but it is a 6 or 7 day week business in a lot of markets. So you're going to work really, really hard, long hours, and you're going to learn a lot. And I think, yes, prepare you, also for, managing employees, performance management, all those different things. I think it's a fantastic program. And really for me, in my first 10 and a half, 11 years of my career out of college was kind of the foundation for me, getting to the point where eventually I did own my own business. I worked in a couple other, like I said, I worked in the staffing business. I worked for a franchisor for a few years. I'd sold some litigation consulting services. I did a few other things post enterprise, but really, yes, that was a core piece of preparing, giving me some really, really good preparation for this step in my, career or work life, so to speak.
I've been messing around with some AI tools to do evaluations on resumes, and like I don't need AI to tell me this, but if I look at your resume before Right at Home, and you'll see, I'll circle around to my point in a second, but I see consistency. It's not like you're jumping and quitting every 5 seconds. Like other people have more turbulence in their career, and then I see, after it's somewhere between a year and 2 years, the company says, we need to give Ben a promotion. He is outpacing the role that he's in. And there's a consistency of your climb throughout that. The two things that I pull out of that is longevity. Can you weather the storms at a place? Because obviously if you're at an enterprise where you just said it's not quite 24/7, but it could be 6 days a week that I'm working, you figured out work ethic and built it there, that probably carried over to the other jobs. Do you think if you reflect back on the things that you got out of a career, is it work ethic and being able to weather storms and not quit, and showing that you deserve more? Like, hey guys, I'm better than you're seeing that I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you want to, whether you're working for yourself or you own a business or you're working in a corporate structure, I think the way you demonstrate value, to your employer, let's say, to kind of answer the first part of the question, is working hard and having that drive that has to be there. And the second piece, yes, is the overcoming adversity, because I think, if you don't have that dynamic, and especially, you're going to start a business. I mean, when you start, now there's some people that come in the system that buy an existing business and there's a little bit of a different dynamic. But for instance, I started, a Right at Home from scratch. That's a difficult transition, especially, most of the people, let's say, that come into the system, they were relatively successful, or they were in pharma sales, or, they were doing different avenues in their career. And then, to take a step back and say, okay, I'm, potentially not going to have an income or very limited income for a year or two as I'm trying to ramp this thing up. You have to also have somewhat of a believe in yourself, bet on yourself, risk takers mentality. But you also have to really, really overcome adversity, because, at the end of the day, Right at Home is a great system and they provide you great tools and it's a great brand. But Right at Home is not going to make, rain fall out of the sky. You've got to go, build relationships in your community and figure out a way to grow your business. And the hard work that's endemic. It's got to be there. But yes, I would say that ability to overcome challenges. And this business is very challenging because, if you really think about it, I mean, we ask a lot, especially of our administrative employees, we got to answer the phones 24 hours a day, and, you can never really turn off your email, and you've got to, we're dealing with people's lives, and sometimes we deal with situations where, we have to, there may be neglect, and we got to get engaged, and we got to make sure the right things are happening. It's where we have snowstorms, and maybe the client's family can't be there, and I got to get in my truck and make sure I get a caregiver to that person who's in a wheelchair, or who's not capable of taking care of themselves. So that requires a pretty high level commitment, in any career, and I think, there's very few people that can be successful, whether you're working, for Right at Home or any organization, just strictly saying, hey, it's a 9 to 5 and I turn my phone off and I'm dialed out. But, this business, especially, what it takes to really execute the delivery, it takes a big commitment, and we're asking a lot of people. So it is hard. I think it's very challenging to, find those right partners, whether it's in your scheduling or your care management or your HR or your recruiting function, all the different functionalities that you have in a home care business, to really, really find that right partner, that person that ultimately is passionate about doing this type of work. Because if they don't have that, I mean, the one thing I've learned, and probably the one biggest mistake I made over the years, is trying to say, oh, I can skill this person up, or I can take this translatable skill. But at the end of the day, there's the one core thing, the why, your passion, like wanting to help seniors, or wanting to be, having a servant attitude, that I want to serve others and make a difference. That has to be at your core. Because if you don't have that, it doesn't matter how much talent you have, or your ability, or your skill set, whether it's in sales or customer service, that data at the core has to be there. So yes, I mean, I think to answer your question, the work ethic's got to be there, and you've got to be, and you got to be committed. And yes, you've got to be able to, you are going to have bumps in the road. You are going to have painful situations where, especially when you're early on, and, as these business gets established and you have certain scale, for example, let's say you have 5 or 7 people working in your office. If one of them terms, you can survive that. It's not the end of the world. You can make strategic moves. But when you start this business, it's typically an owner and one staffing coordinator. Well, what happens if that person doesn't work out? Then you're on your own, right? And you still got to run your business and source the talent and make the right decisions. So it's challenging, especially as you're getting through, depending on your cycle, your first 2 to 3 years in the business, to really navigate that. Because obviously, when you're at a certain scale, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to have 7 employees in my office. That's not going to work from a P&L standpoint. So yes, I would say that'd be ability to overcome adversity, make lemonade out of the lemons you got. There's nothing more important. And I would go for that. I would relate that to anybody in any career, whether you're in corporate America or you're in a franchise business, but especially if you want to own a business, if you don't have that ability to, take adversity and just take it head on and be positive and try to fight through, battle through those challenges, you can't be successful at this.
I appreciate your empathy for your team. Clearly that just came through. But if I go back to, you're looking at this business, I go, hey, Ben, you're going to have to deal with probably the craziest political climate of your life. You're going to have to go through COVID. There's going to be a few recessions in there. There's going to be this thing called Bitcoin that takes off. Here's the landscape for the next 10 years. You're going to go into this business. Do you look back at this and say, wow, I've also created such thick skin in business to battle through and get to where I am at past 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair statement. Obviously, nobody could have anticipated those things. I really look at it as a blessing. Like, the fact that I started my business in 2015 and had, especially COVID. I mean, COVID was a real challenge. I mean, whether it was, losing, we all lost clients during this period. Having to make that phone call and to tell a client, hey, I'm so sorry, but we just our aid tested positive, and unfortunately your dad may have been exposed. And I can tell you from a client standpoint, like, our clients were wonderful. They get it. They understood we were operating in a difficult environment, and it was very difficult to hire, especially in 21, 22, 23. When I look at a run rate of how many hires per year, per month we typically make, I mean, that number was halved, due to various, obviously, conditions and things going on, especially for that segment of the workforce, people that are working in kind of entry level jobs. There was a lot of, and I get it. There were a lot of people that said, hey, I'm going to sit on the sidelines. I'm not going to work. But going back to, the timing standpoint, like, for me, I felt blessed that at least, I had gotten my business up and running. And we took a short-term hit, but we actually grew fantastically in 20, 21, 22. It actually, other than a short dip when the first, kind of situations happened in the second quarter of 2020, where there was, all the mandates and things like that, we bounced right back up. So I felt blessed. I know there were owners in our system, and I've talked to them that, like, started their business in 2020 or 2019. For those that are still operating successful, kudos to them, because that must have been, even as hard as it was for, let's say, us or people that were sort of semi-established. I mean, that must have been even exponentially harder, because you're just trying to get off the ground. Because, I saw, at least in our market, I mean, I saw providers literally lose. I mean, I think I lost 20% of my staff, and it took us about a year to get our head count back to what it was pre-COVID, a year and a half of just grinding through the slog. But, we figured out some ways to do some things more efficiently with less people to continue to grow our revenue. But, there were businesses that I saw in our space that literally lost 50, 60% of their revenue or their employees. And some of them never recovered. Some of them are still operating, but significantly below what they were pre-COVID in terms of their hours or their revenue. So yeah, I mean, that was a big challenge. That was a big stress, because, we take our responsibility seriously. We've got people's lives in our hands. We care about them. We want to do well by them. And that was stressful. Or, just the fact that all the quarantines, at any given point, during 2020 or 2021, when we had to do 2-week quarantines, let's say you have 5 employees that work 40 hours a week on quarantine for 2 weeks. That's 200 hours of care off the board. Now, I can't go to my client and say, hey, I've got these 7 people on quarantine. Sorry, I can't help you. We got to figure out a way to do it. Now, we took on overtime. We did different things. We pulled different levers to try to make it work. But yes, it was. I mean, it was. I wouldn't wish that to come back, or that kind of environment, to be honest, again, because it was very, very challenging. But we luckily, we were blessed. We came through it. We actually grew through it. We figured out a way to navigate it, but it was very, very challenging. So yeah, but as I said earlier, I feel blessed that I was at least, not at the scale or level we're at now, but, I at least had some, ramp up, that I was at least, 4 or 5 years in, and on a steady growth curve before we walked down that path. So
when you were going through the process of looking at franchises, and a majority of franchisees in the senior care space come from some sort of relationship with the category. Did you have something similar happen to you? Was there some sort of relationship that brought you into it? Did something happen with your parents, or did you come into this just purely looking at the business?
Well, I have, a very good friend, somebody I worked with for years at Enterprise, franchisee Terry Jeffers, that, I've known for 30 plus years now, that he had opened a Right at Home back in, I think, 2009. So he was somebody that I talked to, so I had some kind of validation from somebody that I knew and trusted and had worked with before. That really loved the business and did it. I did also, I mean, thankfully, no, my parents are relatively healthy, but that was one of the motivating factors for me. I was living in Ohio at the time that I, was wrapping up my corporate career, and I I wanted to relocate here to Pennsylvania, to Lehigh Valley, because my parents are here. I actually wanted to, support them and be a resource as they're aging. My sister's in another state. They wouldn't have any of those kinds of resources. So, I felt a moral obligation. The right thing to do was to be able to, and that was my goal, is how do I start a business? So it was a big jump for me, because I came into an area that I never actually had lived in this market. I had only come back to visit over the years, because I'd lived in California, Ohio, New York. I never lived in this area, so I didn't really have any connections to the Lehigh Valley, but I knew I wanted to be here, and there was an opportunity, and I made the jump and dove in, and thankfully I've been blessed to be successful. But yeah, I mean, it was the motivation to be able to be a help and be around my parents, who luckily are relatively healthy and are still with us in the area at the time I started the business. And also, knowing a franchisee in the system. And I had looked at the space too, because from a standpoint of the growth opportunity that, as people are living much longer, and with the baby boom generation aging out, some of that data, it's really, really a great opportunity, because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to need help. The dynamics of how many years people spend in retirement today versus 50 years ago is massively different. Years ago, people retired at 65, maybe you had a couple years of retirement, maybe you made it to your late 60s, early 70s. Now, I have clients that I've taken care of into their early 100s or late 90s. It's much more common. So people retiring at 70, maybe 65, 70, and living 25 years or 30 years. So, that dynamic was something I had some, peripheral awareness of. But yeah, I mean, it was a combination of seeing some alignment too in the space, that this is very much similar to what's, it is a staffing business, except it's a care delivery business, and that I had done something similar, and that, the opportunity industry, and knowing a franchisee who was somebody that I respected, somebody I'd worked with, that had a really, really good experience, and is still running a great business. Those were kind of some of the, the factors that influenced my path.
Go back to your resume that you were constantly moving up, and then, and I'm sure at some point when you're deciding to make the business, you're like, okay, I've tapped out. How much more do I want to go through the corporate hustle? I'm going to go get into franchising. So you buy this thing, you've grown it for 10 years. What's the dream now? Like how has the dream evolved at what you want to do in business?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm starting to think about, the end point. The way I am wired, I am an all-in kind of person. So, and there's a lot of ways to run these businesses successfully. As you scale, and as we've scaled now, I've tried to, work more remotely, work more on the business instead of in the business, although I still work in the business. But I know myself, and I know that, for me, number one, you can't take your foot off the gas. You can't have a mindset of, well, I'm pretty successful here. We have a pretty good revenue stream. We've done really well, because if you start thinking that way, then you're going to go backwards. So the first thought is the foot doesn't stay off the gas. We want to continue to focus on growing our clientele, growing our business, growing our brand, up until the day that I decide to stop. That can't change. There's a lot, strategically, there's ways we could do that too. I mean, there may be opportunities to look at, expansion in other markets that neighbor ours that may still have an open territory, or just, continue to organically grow what we have. I think there's still opportunity there. But yes, at this point, I have to think through kind of, succession. Is it, I just renewed my franchise agreement at the end of December. So, I look at it as definitely, God willing, health permitting, 5 years for sure. And potentially my horizon, I think, is 10 years, is the finish line for me. And yeah, to continue to grow the brand, continue to do the right things in the community, continue to be impactful, and create a culture where success is expected, and high quality of care is expected, and an aggressive mindset to continue to grow. I mean, if you start to mentally lose that edge in any shape or form, it's your employees will see it. It will affect your organization. At the end of the day, I think the owner or whoever's the leader of the organization has to really, push that dynamic and be dynamic in that area. Because if you don't do that, and I've seen that, I've seen owners that, maybe started out gangbusters, and then maybe they became less engaged or dialed out. And at the end of the day, I think, the results are going to may reflect that. Not everybody. Some people have figured out a way. There's people that are also very successful that built the right, the key is, do you have the right hand person, whether it's your operations leader or, so there's multiple ways to be successful, whether it's as an owner, you're kind of that leader, or you bring in people that can sort of replace or approximate what the owner does. I don't know, some of the people that are owners in this business are really, really talented people. Like, I think it's not always easy to say you're going to find somebody that can do what you can do. And I think that's something I'm wrapping my head around too, is, can I get somebody that can approximate and get a lot of those things done and make my life easier, and still have a successful business, but while I'm still managing, let's say, that person, or managing the strategic vision of the company. That's kind of but again, there are businesses that, the owner is kind of the one that's driving all that. And some of these are really big businesses, and some of them are, earlier stage. And then there's ones where they've got people engaged. So there's multiple ways to be successful, but I think the owner engagement is important. I mean, I think Right at Home really believes that this is, they're not looking to sell a franchise to somebody who is, an investor that's going to be a passive owner. I don't really think that fits this model, because this model is based on relationships, the client, knowing who the owner is, and who's driving the service delivery and all those things. So I think that's an important part of a franchisee in this system. There are other franchises that are not designed that way, where you can essentially buy a business, put a manager in place. It's more, you're working on the market, more the high level CEO stuff, the strategy, and you're not, day to day, let's say, in the store. There are businesses like that within the franchising system. I don't, this is again just my personal opinion. I think home care, you're dealing with people's lives, people's health, people going through hospice and challenging situations. I mean, I think this is a very high touch business, and that's why, going back to what you're saying about AI, like AI can probably do some things in home care that can create some efficiencies, or can improve operations. But at the end of the day, home care can't be Uber. Yeah. It just can't, it's not calling a taxi. You have to intake a client and know all the levels that are required. How much do they weigh? Is it an 80% assist? Are they in a wheelchair? Is it companion level care? Do they sundown? Because the caregivers, when you're making the matching, you gotta, some of that is a subjective process, but you have to know your caregivers too, because generally most organizations are going to have caregivers of varying physical ability, varying physical ability. So you can't partner a client who requires an 80% transfer that might weigh 200 pounds with somebody that, is not capable of doing that. Because then you potentially hurt the client and your employee. So an app can't really do that. I think that's where knowing your employees, knowing their strengths and weaknesses, having gone through, hey, I've seen this caregiver, she dealt with a client with very aggressive dementia that was sundowning, called her nasty names, and she was so patient and so caring and so wired to redirect that person and handle them, where you kind of, as you get to know your people, those stories, and as you get experience with them, then can relate to, well, why are they going to be a match, hopefully, with the next client? Or conversely, you can have people, dementia care is you can train somebody how to do it. You can make somebody better to do it. But I truly believe you either are wired, to be able to separate disease from person, or you are not. And if you're not wired to do that, that's okay. That doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't even make you a bad caregiver. But if you're going to, for instance, internalize what a person with dementia, because they have no filter, is saying, and you can't say, hold on, time out. This is not them. This is the disease talking, right? And you're going to get upset or get emotional. You're not going to be able to do that successfully, right? So maybe that client's not a good client for you. But again, going back to the matching and making good decisions on who you partner caregivers with clients, that takes getting to know those people, seeing how they do, seeing where they're successful, seeing where their areas of opportunity are, and trying to train and develop them and make them better. But some people, for instance, have just a more of a natural, regardless of age or experience. You could be an 18-year-old, very young person and be great at doing this. And conversely, you could be a 70-year-old with tons of experience, and maybe you've worked in a nursing home and you just are not wired emotionally to kind of do this successfully, which means, again, maybe you partner that person with someone who doesn't have a cognitive deficit, because we care for people with different physical disabilities or limitations in terms of personal care, and then there's the cognitive side of it too, which can range. So yes, I think can an app really do that? I don't think so, because it's not the same as like, I just need to ride down the street. Hopefully, as long as the driver has a reasonable driving record and can use a GPS, it doesn't require any special skill set or really subjective thought into how you make matches. Companies in our space that just throw mud at the wall and see what sticks, that's not high service delivery. That's not part of our brand, and that's not what we're trying to deliver. Now, we're not perfect. Sometimes we make decisions, but for my team, I say, tell me why you did this. Why did you put this person here? What was your thought process? If they have a good thought process, because I've made mistakes too, where, hey, this caregiver is going to be a home run, and then it's a disaster. You can never totally legislate for putting two human beings together. That's always subjective, and there's always some. But you can put some conscious thought and say, well, I chose this person because they had success with this situation and they've demonstrated this. And I think as long as you're making good kind of analytical, thought-based decisions on why you schedule a person or why you connect someone with a client, generally speaking, you're going to do pretty well. You're going to make mistakes, and sometimes you get lucky too. Sometimes you go, well, this is a little bit of a flyer, but we like some qualities about this particular person, and we think we think they could be a good match, and sometimes it works out. So again, there is some subjectivity there, but I think it's very, very important. One of the most critical pieces of this is your matching process. How do you go about that? How do you hold your schedulers accountable to do that? Because I get it, they have a pressure. If they have unfilled shifts, you're going to be coming down on them. Why are we losing hours, or why are we missing shifts, or why are we not delivering? And their mindset can be, well, let me just play a video game here and just plug in widgets into the machine here, and that can't ever be the mindset. There's always got to be conscious thought into what you do. And if you have a conscious thought, like, here's why I did this, and you kind of carried out that logic, and it doesn't work out, that's okay. Nobody's going to be perfect at this process, and as I said, you can't legislate always for putting two human beings together. But I think that's the important part, is that you really get to know your caregivers on a personal level and try to assess what they're strongest at and what will work for them, and because it's got to be a mutual match too. A client has to work for the caregiver. If we don't staff in a way where we put a gun to someone's head and say, here's where you're going. It's, hey, this is a great client for you, and we think this will be a great match. Would you like to engage? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, we have to respect that and move on too. But a caregiver might say, this is not a great match for me, and we have to respect that. So it's about bringing two parties together where it's a mutual fit, a mutual match, and the client feels value and feels quality of care, and the caregiver also feels value and appreciate it, and that it meets their needs.
Yeah.
That has to work both ways.
Well, Ben, look, at the end of the day, first of all, I'm grateful that you gave me some of your time and told me your story. But clearly, Right at Home develops franchisees. They found someone who had a great background, who wanted to do the right things. And now you've surpassed 10 years and you've signed another agreement. And I'm grateful that you shared some of your story. Thanks for doing this today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it. It was great. It was great to talk to you, Nick. Thank you.
For Ben, I'm Nick. This was another episode of Meet the Z. Take care. Thanks, Ben. That was awesome.